We're now going to read the scripture. Today's reading is from Mark chapter 2, 23 to 28. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath.'" And now I'm going to read in Hindi. ऐसा हुआ कि सबत के दिन यीशु खेतों से होता हुआ जा रहा था। जाते जाते उसके शिष्य खेतों से अनाज की बालें तोड़ने लगे। इस पर फरीसी यीशु से कहने लगे, "देख, सबत के दिन वे ऐसा क्यों कर रहे हैं जो उचित नहीं है?" इस पर यीशु ने उनसे कहा, "क्या तुमने कभी दाऊद के विषय में नहीं पढ़ा कि उसने क्या किया था जब वह और उसके साथी संकट में थे और उन्हें भूख लगी थी? क्या तुमने नहीं पढ़ा कि जब अबियातर महायाजक था तब वह परमेश्वर के मंदिर में कैसे गया और परमेश्वर के भेंट में चढ़ाई रोटियां उसने कैसे खाई, जिनका कहना महायाजक को छोड़कर किसी को भी उचित नहीं है? कुछ रोटियां उसने उनको भी दी थी जो उसके साथ थे." यीशु ने उनसे कहा, "सबत मनुष्य के लिए बनाया गया है, न कि मनुष्य सबत के लिए। इसलिए मनुष्य का पुत्र सबत का भी प्रभु है." This is the word of the Lord.
You may be seated. In 1928, the economist John Maynard Keynes wrote an article called "Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren." Keynes, one of the great economists of the last 150 years, writes this article about the economic possibilities of his grandchildren in 1928, which would be us today. Depending on how old you are, it's roughly our generation. That would have been his grandchildren. Keynes had a huge profile as a scholar and as an economist, and in this article called "Economic Possibilities for Grandchildren," think about the time, 1928. He was writing from a post-industrial time where innovation was in a whole new place. Automation was happening in our country. This was the roaring 20s, right before the Great Depression, so a kind of economic boom. We had just gotten out of World War I and had said we will never go to war at that scale ever again. You know, see how that lasted. This was the time of rich possibility in our country. And Keynes writes this article and basically says, at the time we're at, when our grandchildren are here, there will be such innovation in technology and automation that the average worker will work 3 days a week, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. 15 hours total will be the full-time workload of the average American. How's that going for you guys? Is everybody good? We're all working 3 hours a day because of the amazing technological innovations that have happened? No, we just work more. Have this in your mind the next time you hear a pompous, prophecy of the future of technology and innovation, of how this technology is going to change your life and change the world. This is just not the case of what has happened. Keynes was wrong, and every time a sociological prediction like this happens, we never follow up with the sociologist to say, "Hey, what do you have to say about this now?" Because they're usually dead. Instead of the 3-hour workday that Keynes said we would have, we have 18-hour workdays. We have Amazon employees going to the bathroom in bottles because they're not allowed a break. Instead of a life filled with leisure, which he said, you'll have to prepare a life of leisure because you won't work that much and you'll have plenty of money. So prepare to, have your grandchildren be ready to just be, relaxing a lot. Tell them about that. Instead of a life of leisure, we have a life filled with exhausting work. I mean, even not 1928, but 1998, we were told that the internet would bridge divides. How's that going? Because we were going to be interconnected with the world? Are you guys feeling more interconnected as a country with the world, right? This is what we've been told. We were told email would save us hundreds of hours of correspondence. Now email is all we do. Like most jobs are just answering emails. And it's like, what do you do for work? I don't remember, you know? Instead of a life of leisure, we have instituted work at home. Work is now in our homes. And so because we're working from home, we don't know if we live at work or live to work or work to live. Everything's mixed up. And still, we're still believing that more technology and more money would lead to more leisure. The AI revolution is reiterating this lie. Tyler Cowen is a decorated economist out at George Mason University with the Mercatus Center, and he said, prepare, because AI is going to provide multi-billion-dollar companies to employ hundreds and hundreds of people who only a few of them work a few hours a day. It's the same thing. You see, history just repeats itself because the problem is not a technological problem. The problem is an anthropological problem. We have been given more technology than ever. It's not a tech problem, it's a human problem. Even with our innovations and technologies, we have only found more ways to work and work more and be more busy and more dedicated to our life. If the Industrial Revolution and the Internet Revolution only caused us to work more, what makes us think the next tech revolution with AI would be any different? Friends, there is something in us as human beings that cannot separate or cannot reconcile, probably is a better word, cannot reconcile the relationship between work and rest. Like we don't know how to not work or not rest or how to separate the two. Because you understand this in your weekly experience. Every time you rest, you're recuperating from the work you've just done and scared about the work that's coming ahead. My generation has deemed this the Sunday scaries, where you start to think about, oh my gosh, it's Sunday night, I have to get back to work, the kids are going here, I gotta meet with my roommate, I have to do a meal plan, I have to figure this out, and the responsibilities of daily life begin to encroach upon you. There's just no good relationship between how we work and how we rest. Byung-Chul Han is a Korean-German philosopher, and he is a Catholic also. And he has this important book called In Praise of Inactivity. And in it, like a good philosopher, he tells us we have lost the ability to kind of separate this life of inactivity from productivity because of capitalism. We're just in this space where we're just constantly resting from work to work more. We don't really know what work and rest really are, a relationship between the two of them. And he says one of the things that we need to integrate into our life is festive celebration and Sabbath. Because festive celebration and Sabbath is different from what the American generally thinks of rest. Again, we think of rest as recuperation from work or preparation to be productive. And we've medicalized and individualized rest. You need to rest because you need this for your own existence and body, and it's you and your time. And however you rest the way you need to rest. But Chul Han says the real rest comes from communal participation together in a community resting in God's goodness, which is the Christian difference of what rest means, which is to Sabbath. Our teaching text is around Sabbath, and our kind of general theme of the last month has been this series called Practicing Justice. And this series is kind of looking at these 5 core practices that we have committed to as in the life of our community. And we're saying, how do these practices that we live, this is in the lifeblood of our church, how do these 5 practices contribute to a just world? Justice for us at Imago is very simple. It's just the world becoming the way God intended it to be, where relationships are made right, where there is equity and equality, where people are living the life they can live before God and in God's life. Justice is a gospel thing, where God is reconciling the world to become like himself. And you can see how some of these, you can actually make the natural connection for many of these. Hospitality, we talked about last week, the ways in which welcoming people can contribute to justice. Generosity, right? The way that our giving, you saw it with Water Project, simply giving money can transform the social vitality of a community across the globe. It's incredible what generosity can do to contribute to justice. But celebration, I think, is probably the one that needs the most unpacking, I would argue, because celebration seems to be not doing justice. Celebration and Sabbath are these two words that we use that says the dedication of our life to God and resting in his goodness is what we need to do the work of justice. To define celebration, I define it this way. It's the communal life happily resting in praise of God's goodness. Communal life, it's not individual. Biblical celebration is not individual. Sabbath is not individual. It is communal life that happily rests in praise of God's goodness. When was the last time you really experienced true rest, celebration, Sabbath that looked like this? Where a community life was happily resting in the praise of God's goodness. When did you experience this? Perhaps it's just putting on a little bit of a different lens every time you come to church. Church, in our Western world, has become all about consumption, hasn't it? And the American church has fed this. We've become marketers of the gospel instead of co-celebrants of God's goodness. We've become peddlers of religious goods and services instead of true worshipers of God. The American church is guilty of lacking a celebratory core, but I'm proud of Imago Dei and being a part of this church that before you come here, there's food in between services and the life of our children and even Bob doing worship with announcements with his kids. There's a celebratory season in the church every Sunday that comes together and happily rests in God's goodness. The picture of Sabbath and celebration is less like consumerism and more like a great meal. I had a moment like this when my family and I went to this family camp up in Vancouver, British Columbia 2 weeks ago. They are masters at this camp at helping you learn the art of rest and celebration in the biblical sense. And they put together this meal in the middle of the week where they take your kids to have them have their own fancy meal, and then they give this beautiful meal. I've got a picture that I took from it where they have this incredible, you're in the middle of their farm. They're on this island off of Vancouver, British Columbia, and they have this whole farm that they've used to feed the entire camp. So they don't have a lot of processed foods there. They're just giving kind of living truly off of the land. And they make this beautiful meal of chicken and carrots and corn and all these things they've grown on the land, and they put tremendous work into it. And they put this meal together, and we all get dressed up, and our kids go and have their own fancy meal. And they tell you at the start of this meal, this is what worship looks like. It looks like resting in God's goodness. The lack of our experience with this is major in America. We don't have a feeling all the time of the richness of the celebration of what God is calling us into when he calls us to rest. That rest looks more like this than it does look like much of the church life. It's why in the life of Imago, we have a lot of food around, because we believe it kind of has this sense of celebration, that every Sunday should be this communal life happily resting in God's goodness. The Jewish people, that Jesus was a Jewish man, and his practice in the Sabbath was a part of you kind of view Sabbath as like a subset of this larger dedication that the Jewish people had to celebration. The Sabbath was, in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11, this idea of setting aside one day and making it holy to the Lord. This was a command from God's mouth to the ears of God's people. You shall work 6 days, and on the seventh day you shall rest. It was this beautiful command. Cease from working. All your workers should stop working, and every day on Saturday, on the seventh day, you do not work. But that was a subset of a larger celebratory life of the people of God in Israel. There was this beautiful practice called the Year of Jubilee you might have heard of in the Old Testament. Every 50th year, at the kind of turn of a generation, slaves would go free, the land would lay fallow, they wouldn't grow any crops, workers would rest, and any debts would be forgiven. It was almost this big reset button for the people of God to say, we are going to happily rest as a community in praise of God's goodness and cease for an entire year every generation and release people of debts. You're starting to see maybe how celebration and justice might work together, aren't you? Because the celebration life of the people of God has always been the fuel of its justice work. And we're living in a time where we're trying to sever the justice work of God from what's called righteousness, living righteously under God's goodness and providing and accounting on him to be the one who brings the justice. The year of Jubilee, the Sabbath, and then also the other subset of the celebration life of the people of God in the Old Testament was festivals and feasts. Constantly, you'll be reading your Old Testament, it'll be descriptions of elaborate meals and times where they would tent. They'd go camp together and live in tents in the festival of booths, and they'd live together to remind themselves that they were once wanderers and they never had land for a while. All of this communal life was under this banner of celebration that says, when we happily rest in praise of God's goodness, we are reminded who we actually are. That's really what the heart of the Sabbath is. It's a reminding who we actually are. And celebration as justice, celebration as key to the work of justice, of the life of communal worship and communal rest. This celebration as justice means it's a refusal to capitulate to like capitalism's pressures on us. Pressures of achievement, pressures of productivity. Everything has to be optimized now. Have you noticed this? Even your rest has to be optimized. You've got a watch that tells you how good your quality of your sleep is, and everything's been medicalized to the point that we've really sapped the meaning out of every part of our life. Even rest has become points in our culture. Food has become nutrition as opposed to taste and beauty and goodness. Our founding pastor, who wrote the book on some of this stuff, he says this: when we come out on the other side of Sabbath, we realize that the world has not fallen off of its axis. The world keeps running because God is sustaining it, not us. Christians there's a particular history you can trace that the movement of Christianity in the local church is responsible for some of the great acts of justice in the world. The invention of the hospital, the invention of the orphanage. Many nations that have emancipated slaves have been Christian work and exegesis, all of this beautiful preaching that has happened. How has the local church across time sustained its work of justice to the point that it's at today? Because they have recognized justice must include a life of celebration. Without celebration, there is no justice. True justice involves celebration. So today, let's look at the teaching text, the foundation of celebration, the heart and the Lord of celebration. First, the foundation of celebration. We're given the law and love of the Sabbath. In Mark chapter 2, the verse that Susan read, says that one Sabbath, Jesus is going through the grain fields. He was a Jew. He was practicing the Sabbath. But they began to pick grains, and the Pharisees, right, they kind of push back, and they say, why are you doing this unlawful thing on the Sabbath? Because the Sabbath had been kind of built off of the foundation of it. It had been given as this beautiful law. I always describe the law as this beautiful fence that God has put around the house. But the whole point of the law was to draw people to the house of God, just to draw people close to God. So it was not just to keep bad things out, like overwork, but it was also to keep the good in. It was to kind of keep the people close to the heart of God. And so the fencing around kind of the life of the community was meant, the law, the commands were simply meant to bring people to the law or to the love of Jesus and the love of God. They bring the people in. But the Pharisees and the tax collectors and the scribes, they would build these elaborate structures around to make almost like the house of God became a compound, you know? No people in, no people out, just us. It was kind of this way of forcing people out. And one of the laws they had on top of the law was that you couldn't pick grain. You couldn't separate grain. And they saw the disciples doing that, and they're like, you're breaking the law. But Jesus reminds them, this is actually not the law. You have made the law more than what the law is. The church is famous for doing this. It's a command to rest, but it's one that needs its heart to be tied to the Creator. That it's not just about, this is what you do or don't do on the Sabbath, but it's about how do you rest with God as the creator in creation. So again, work is not bad in the Sabbath theology. Work is good. We did a sermon on vocation a couple weeks ago to kind of help us understand the beauty of work. And the cool thing about Christianity is it allows us this beauty of work 6 days a week and resting on one day, and the interplay that the two have. That really, as we work, we're working unto the Lord, and as we rest unto the Lord. This is to say that biblical rest is not bed rotting, where you're sitting and scrolling all day. Now, rest is not simply ceasing from activity, it's actually engaging in the life of God. Jesus pulls them back to kind of the key of Sabbath, the foundation of Sabbath and what it means. That word, Shabbat, has a passive and an activity in the command in Exodus chapter 20. 6 days you shall labor and do your work, but the seventh is a Sabbath to the Lord. Note that, it's a Sabbath to the Lord. And so the word Shabbat has both passive and active qualities, the way that we should kind of imagine it. Sabbath means to cease, like lay everything down, don't work. So one of the commands of God is to just cease, just stop. It's one of the hardest things for humans to do. Everything and everyone goes inactive. Shabbat, just stop, just stop. And you think, well, I have this to do, I have that to do, I have this to do, I have that. We all have such full lives that it seems impossible to cease. But simply laying things aside. But the active element of Sabbath is to set aside and to seek. So it actually takes work to Sabbath, doesn't it? Think about the ancient Israelites. They were living off the land. They were living farm to table. It's not like they could just go to the grocery store and pick up a few things for the Sabbath. They were working all week and storing food creatively and working differently so that the Sabbath could come and be a blessing, right? They were arranging and setting aside their schedules in order to have communal life, happily resting in praise of God's goodness. And it meant that they would seek God at the Sabbath. It wasn't a time where they would just veg and relax, although they would. There's a great reason to sit and watch some Netflix. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not true biblical rest. True biblical rest is about seeking and reminding yourself about the goodness of God. And so Sabbath and celebration has this active and passive element because we're working to participate in the rhythms of life of the triune God, participating with him as he rested on the seventh day of creation in Genesis chapter 2, receiving our creatureliness. Remember a mentor of mine early on in ministry telling me, Chris, ministry is infinite. There is no end to the work of ministry. You are finite. Know the difference. He was trying to teach me, Chris, you could literally work at ministry all day, every day, no matter what. And friends, I have never been more tempted to do that than to be the lead pastor of this beautiful community. It's nothing about you. I mean, I love pastoring here, but there is literally endless work. There's endless work in shepherding, pastoring. The needs of people, the needs of a community, building a staff and working at the organizational aspects of the church. When I cease, I remind myself, well, I'm invited to remind myself. I don't automatically do this, but I'm invited to remind myself that God is leading us here, and God is at work, and God is our shepherd. And I'm one of the under shepherds, just remembering who I am, remembering my creatureliness, remembering who God is. The scribes and Pharisees were building off of this and they kind of eliminated the heart of the Sabbath. The foundation of the Sabbath is a command. Hear it loud and clear to me to you this morning. The command is clear. Sabbath, rest. It's a command from God. I'm just a messenger to you. He's told you to cease work and to seek him. Every seventh day, cease and seek. But it's not just a command of law and love. There's a heart behind it. Like I said, the fence that the law has is to draw you to communion with God, to be in life with God. That's what he's trying to do. Make no mistake. He is trying to communicate with you, to be with you, and to know you. And the heart of celebration is to rest and renew your life. Jesus has trouble with the Sabbath here in Mark chapter 2, and then literally the next story is him healing on the Sabbath in Mark chapter 3. If you've got your Bible open, it's just the next story. It says Jesus heals on the Sabbath, and he's in the synagogue, and there's a man with a withered hand. and he heals the man. And in this, he says, hey, which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? To save life or kill? And he's trying to drive at the heart of the Sabbath. He's like, look, the Sabbath is not about rule following. It's not about a particular 24 set of hours where you're specifically setting up all of your life to obey these stringent commands given by religious professionals. No, the Sabbath is to draw you to God, to bring you to God. And so he broke the rules of the Pharisees while keeping and fulfilling the law of God through the Ten Commandments. And he gives this story from David's life as an illustration. Did you pick up on this? It's from 1 Samuel chapter 28, verses 1-8. David and his men are on this mission of war and also trying to run for their lives at the same time. And they come to this place where they are hungry and famished and need rest. And they come to this priest, and the only thing the priest has is this consecrated bread that's only for the priest to eat. And the priest breaks in some ways or bends and adjusts this law to do good to David and his companions. And you see the dynamic of rest and renewal happening in the heart of this story that Jesus tells. Think about the men laying their arms down, laying their protective armor down, laying their weapons down and resting and eating bread. The rest and the renewal of their bodies. That's what the heart of the Sabbath is all about. That's why Jesus says, the Sabbath, this command, and this day set aside. He says it in our teaching text in Mark 2:27. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, the Sabbath is a gift to you. It's not meant to enslave you. It's not meant to be something that brings you down. And he says David is a perfect example of this, resting and renewing. The Sabbath was made for man as a gift to man, not man for the Sabbath. The early church must have understood this because as far as we can tell, the Sabbath starts to disappear in the early church. Saturday as the seventh day moves into something called the Lord's Day as the place of God's worshipful life of the community. Of all the New Testament documents after Jesus, Peter, James, John, Paul, all of the earliest disciples have nearly nothing to say about Sabbath practice in the New Testament, except for one place in Colossians 2 where Paul tells the Colossians, hey, chill about the festivals because it's not really about the festival life anymore. It's about finding our rest in the Lord of the Sabbath. All this to say there's no biblical mandate for believers in Jesus to cease work for 24 hours. But there is the heart of the Sabbath built into Jesus Christ himself, whose very next line after he says, look, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Son of Man himself is Lord, he says, even of the Sabbath. Like I span all time because I am Lord, even of the seventh day. And he invokes his name and his place to show his fulfillment and replacement of the Sabbath. Fulfillment. The way to fill up that which was lacking. Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote the best book on Sabbath from a Jewish perspective, a brilliant mind, little book called The Sabbath. And in it, he talks about the temple being the place where people met with God and the Sabbath being the time people met with God. The temple, the space where people would meet with God, and the Sabbath is the time you would meet with God. And both were these invitations for the community's life to happily rest in praise of God's goodness. The temple was where you went. The Sabbath was when you went to be with the Lord. And what Jesus does in claiming lordship over the Sabbath is to say, I have invited you to find your rest and renewal not in the Sabbath alone, but in the Lord of the Sabbath. That the foundation of the Sabbath being this beautiful command that we should hear to cease and to seek God. That the heart of it is all about how might I rest and renew my life in God's triune life. Well then, the only answer is to find the Lord of the Sabbath, to be invited in to Jesus, who says in Matthew 11:28, what does he say? You know this verse probably if you've been around church for a little bit. Come to me, he says. If you're weary, I will give you rest. So when we rest, when we stop, we actually get the opportunity not to go to the place of the temple or to the day of the Sabbath, but we go to the person of Jesus Christ. Now you might be thinking, that sounds a little theoretical and ethereal. Where might I find Jesus? Oh, I've got great news for you. He has called this corporate gathering here on Sunday his body. So, you're here. Congratulations, you're with Jesus Christ. There's no wondering about it. You don't have to guess. You don't have to feel something. You might not feel something for a long time being with Jesus. But I have great news. He's with you. You're with him. Because in his atoning work on the cross, he institutes this community called the church. And the thing the early followers were obsessive about was not Sabbath regulations, but about the building of the local church. Because the church becomes the temple. And the Sabbath practice of the church, of the community life, becomes the celebration, festive life of the church. And the table that we partake in here of bread and wine becomes the festive. It becomes the feast. It becomes the thing that we are feasting upon is Jesus himself. And so, my friends, the big so what of this sermon, the big why should I care about celebration and Sabbath and worship falls simply to the ordinary gathering of saints every single Sunday and your essential participation in it. Think back to the picture I showed you of that meal together. That took tremendous work to put together. You've probably been a part of a few meals like that in your life. For some of us, we haven't been a part of many meals like that, and the few ones that we can remember of a good meal made with care under great companionship and goodness, it's rare in our life, and we remember that because it's not something we experienced regularly. There's something special about a meal like that. It's kind of a picture and a window into the rest that is to come in heaven. That's called the marriage supper of the Lamb. It's given the same celebration. And so every corporate gathering we do, it's kind of this imitation and sign of the thing to come, that one day we will actually exist in restful celebration. That's the future existence for Christians, is in happily resting in God's goodness and praise of God's glory. Can you imagine for a second resting at that kind of level? Can you imagine not thinking about responsibilities and being completely content in the life and manner and grace of the host? That's what it feels like. And we come here and do our best to practice that in some way, to give a taste, like an appetizer of what is to come. But it's not here yet. And so long as it's not here, you need to be here. We need you here. Because we're setting a table, we're not serving a product. And if we're really happily resting in praise of God's goodness, we need as few of us in this room that are sitting back cynically and assessing the content of the church. We need table setters. We need people who come with the active passivity of Sabbath, coming to prepare the meal, resting in God's goodness. When we show up to worship on Sunday, we're not listening to other people sing songs and assessing a sermon. We're participating in the celebration life of Jesus. So I don't like every song we sing. That's great. I tell Bob that. I say, I don't need to like every song. Because actually, what I need to do is I need to sing and celebrate the goodness of God. And actually, it's when the song is not my favorite that could be the greatest invitation to me joining in the celebration life of God, couldn't it? Couldn't it? I don't have to like every sermon that's preached here. I didn't like the one at 9 a.m. I'm here trying my best here at 11. Hope it's better. I didn't love it. I'll be honest. It's not about if we like the sermon or not. It's feasting on the word. And it's about leaning in and going, I'm here to participate in something. I don't need to be a consumer of worship. You can consume worship on YouTube. When we show up together, it is essential that we celebrate in the life of God, and we need you here. We need every single one of you here. And there are going to be days where you're sitting there and you don't feel like you got much to give. That's great. We're in a community. You don't got to give much. When you're in a community and you feed together, what do you bring? Sometimes one dish. My wife worked all weekend. We had a family gathering on Sunday night or Friday night. And Allie's been working all weekend, so I've been with the kids alone. I said, I'm bringing chips and guac. That's all I got. It's kind of the bachelor way out, It's like I don't have to prepare much. Sometimes that's all you can bring. We need it. We need it. We need you. You're a part of our community. By you showing up and participating in worship, you matter, and it contributes to the celebration life of the church. And this is the second big so what. Number one, so what? Showing up to church is an act of cosmic celebration, okay? We need you here. But the second so what, it might be bigger for us as Imago. We simply will not be a church of justice if we neglect being a church of celebration and worship. We just won't, I'll tell you. Historically, in the life of the church, the greatest moments of justice have been tied to worship, celebration. There's a particular history around the people of God that matters. There is no civil rights movement without the Black church. And the Black church exists within a context of celebratory life of worship that is known to us as gospel music. There is no movement without the gift of the Black church in this country and their ability to be dedicated to celebration. The growth of the church in China, in the house church movement, and their work towards caring for orphans, which you can research easily, comes in concert with their almost stubbornness to meet together even under persecution. They will not miss a Sunday. It's not happening. They live in celebratory life and community. We sang a song in the earlier worship set, and we'll sing another here, written by a woman named Fanny Crosby. She lived in the late 1800s, she lived a long life to her 90s, into 1915. She was blind. She was afflicted with blindness her whole life. And she's known as one of the most prolific hymn writers in U.S. history, this woman. Her whole life she was blind and dedicated, though, more than 30 years of her career to the poor in New York City. Those 30 years of her life, by the way, were years 60 to 92 or 95 or something, until she died. She started at 60, dedicating her life to missions work to the poor in some of New York City's most difficult neighborhoods. In her younger years, she was this celebrated poet. She was well published as a poet, songwriter, and she was an advocate for social justice causes, but not Christian. She wasn't really involved in the church. Advocacy particularly for the blind. But her whole life changed when she separated from her husband at age 60. She had a divorce that cost her all her money, and being blind, she relied on the charity of others. And she realized her only work left to do is to give in return to what she's been given. And so she actually dedicated, around the time of her divorce, to join the ranks of missionaries. She became a missionary at the age 60 to New York's most impoverished neighborhoods. And she moved into a rundown flat on Frankfurt Street on the Lower East Side, just blocks from Manhattan's worst slums at the turn of the century. For the next 30 years, Crosby became an active worker among missions in New York City, devoting her life to the outreach of the people in poverty and need. What sustained this woman? What was she made of? What brought her the ability to sustain in mission work? Well, Crosby wrote somewhere between 5,000 and 9,000 hymns. Crosby was a woman of worship. And her legacy, this continues on now through the Bowery Mission, if you know about that in New York City. Her entire legacy is worship and justice, celebration and advocacy. And she's not alone. Again, this is the history of the church, Imago. If Imago Dei desires to be what we long to be, which is a church of justice, we must return to the tie of celebration and justice alongside it. There is a particular Portland temptation, and I love this city. I was born and raised here. I love our heart for justice in this city. But there is a particular Portland Christian temptation to sever the life of celebratory rest from the work of justice. You will be told through your life it's not only possible, but probably of greater benefit in larger society to just do good without God, to work at justice and ignore worship. You will be among the fewest Christians in history who have done so. Christians have commonly and at our best dedicated to corporate worship, dedicated to rest, to know that God is the one who sustains the very work we long to commit to. And when you and I inevitably run out of gas, of the passion for whatever cause we're passionate about, where will we return for rest? Where will we go for passion and pathos for what we long to do in this world? And when you and me inevitably involve our own selfishness and ego in the work of justice, when we help people and serve them not truly for their gain, but for our image management, when we speak more about justice than actually do justice, and when our hypocrisy finally rears its ugly head publicly in our friend group, where will we return for absolution for such sin? We need the work of the cross. We need the work of someone praying for us. We need the work of the body and blood shed for us, giving us the atoning work of Jesus. Only Christ, the Lord of Sabbath and justice, can invite us into the life we really need, which is not a break, which is not leisure, which is not just another day off. It's happily resting in the place of God's goodness, praising him in community. This is what you need because this is what God has given you. Crosby's greatest work is the song Blessed Assurance. And I'll leave you with this final line. It says this: perfect submission, she writes. Think about this woman, blind, 85, dedicated to orphans. This is her life. Perfect submission. All is at rest. I, in my Savior, am happy and blessed. Watching and waiting, looking above, filled with his goodness, lost in his love. Let's stand and receive the love of God.